War is brutal, but in Vietnam, the battlefield wasn't just fought with guns and bombs, it was fought with the land itself. The dense jungles, the winding rivers, and even the very ground beneath the soldiers' feet became weapons. From hidden spikes to exploding flags, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army mastered the art of guerrilla warfare, turning every step into a potential death trap. From 1955 to 1975, the Vietnam War became one of the most grueling and complex conflicts in modern history. The United States, supporting South Vietnam, fought against the communist forces of North Vietnam, backed by the Soviet Union and China. The Viet Cong knew they couldn't match American firepower, so they fought a very different kind of war, one that relied on hidden dangers, psychological warfare, and deadly booby traps. Today, we're diving into the deadliest booby traps used against American soldiers in Vietnam. Traps so simple, yet so terrifying, they changed the way wars would be fought forever. Speaking of the deadliest booby traps, few were as simple yet devastating as the Punji sticks. These sharpened bamboo stakes, hidden beneath the jungle floor, turned every step into a potential nightmare. Soldiers walking through the thick, humid terrain of Vietnam had no way of knowing if the next step they took would be their last moment standing. The moment their foot broke through the flimsy covering, gravity did the rest, impaling them on the razor-sharp points below. Punji sticks weren't designed to kill instantly. Instead, they were built to wound, to cripple, and to spread fear. The Viet Cong knew that an injured soldier slowed down his entire unit. A single man impaled by Punji sticks would need to be carried, his screams echoing through the trees, his team struggling to move while under the constant threat of ambush. In war, a wounded man is often a bigger burden than a dead one. What made Punji sticks even more horrifying was what coated them. Many were smeared with feces, urine, or poisonous plant extracts, turning a simple wound into a festering infection. Imagine stepping onto one of these spikes, the sharpened bamboo piercing through your boot and straight into your flesh. The pain is immediate, but the real suffering is yet to come. Even if the wound wasn't deep, bacteria and toxins would soon set in, leading to fear, swelling, and in some cases, amputation. And it didn't stop there. Some of these traps were designed to be even crueler. Instead of placing the sticks straight up, the Viet Cong positioned them at an angle, pointing downwards. If a soldier tried to pull his leg out, the spikes dug deeper, tearing flesh and muscle, making escape even more painful. Others were built with secondary pits right next to the first, meaning the moment a fellow soldier rushed in to help, he too would fall victim to the same fate. The fear of these traps was enough to shake even the most battle-hardened men. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? How do you prepare for a danger that waits beneath your very feet? American soldiers had to move cautiously, testing the ground with bayonets, always aware that one wrong step could lead to agony. Next to the Punji sticks, the bamboo whip trap was one of the most terrifying weapons hidden in the jungles of Vietnam. Unlike pits filled with spikes, this trap didn't wait for you to step on it, it attacked. Fast, brutal, and nearly impossible to dodge, the bamboo whip could turn an ordinary patrol into a deadly ambush in an instant. At first glance, there was nothing unusual, just dense jungle, tall grass, and thick bamboo. But hidden in the undergrowth was a deadly surprise. A long bamboo pole, lined with sharpened spikes, was pulled back into an arch and held in place by a simple tripwire. The moment an unsuspecting soldier walked through, his boot barely brushing against the nearly invisible line, the trap was set in motion. The wire gave out, and in a split second, the massive pole whipped forward at nearly 100 miles per hour. Before the victim even realized what had happened, the foot-long spikes tore through flesh, impaling him in the chest, stomach, or legs. Some men were hit so hard that the spikes pierced straight through their bodies, pinning them to trees. There was no time to react, no chance to run. 1 second you're on patrol, the next you are fighting for your life. And just like the Punji sticks, the horror didn't stop with the initial wound. The spikes were often coated in poison, feces, or venomous plant extracts, ensuring that even if a soldier survived the impact, infection or toxic shock would set in soon after. Imagine the pain, not just from the puncture wound itself, but from the burning, spreading sickness that followed. Would you even make it back to base in time to be treated, or would the jungle claim you before help arrived? The real terror of the bamboo whip trap was how easy it was to deploy. The Viet Cong could set one up in minutes and hide them along narrow jungle paths, near riverbanks, or even around makeshift camps where exhausted soldiers stopped to rest. They didn't need bullets or explosives, just bamboo, spikes, and patience. For American troops, every step in the jungle became a gamble. Similar to punji sticks, the tiger trap was a brutal, merciless weapon hidden in the dense jungles of Vietnam. Designed to strike from above, it was a death sentence for any soldier unfortunate enough to trigger it. Unlike other traps that targeted the legs or feet, this one aimed higher. It was meant to crush bones, pierce flesh, and shatter skulls. The trap worked with terrifying simplicity. A large wooden plank, lined with sharp metal spikes, was suspended overhead, hidden among the leaves and branches. It was held in place by a simple tripwire, stretched low across the jungle floor. The moment an unsuspecting soldier stepped forward and brushed against the wire, the trap was unleashed. The rope gave way, and in a heartbeat, a massive spike-studded board, weighted with bricks, came crashing down. The force was enough to send a man to the ground instantly, impaling his shoulders, back, and even worse, his head. Some soldiers never even had time to look up before the sharpened spikes found their mark. This trap was made even deadlier by the sheer weight behind it. Viet Cong fighters would attach bricks, rocks, or anything heavy enough to increase the impact. The result? Crushed bones, punctured lungs, and deep, gaping wounds that left little chance of survival. Those who didn't die instantly were left screaming in pain, their bodies pinned under the deadly plank while their units scrambled to free them. And in the jungle, screams meant death. They echoed through the trees, alerting nearby enemy forces. A wounded soldier wasn't just a burden, he was a beacon, a sign for an ambush. For many, the tiger trap wasn't just a falling plank of death. It was also a deep pit dug into the earth, camouflaged with leaves and branches, waiting for soldiers to step into the void. These pits were lined with razor-sharp spikes at the bottom, ensuring that anyone who fell in would be impaled instantly. In some cases, the Viet Cong combined both elements. Soldiers would first fall into the pit, only to have a massive spiked log come crashing down on them moments later, sealing their fate in a gruesome, inescapable death trap. Swinging mace. Just the name alone is enough to send a chill down your spine. This deadly booby trap was one of the most brutal weapons hidden in the dense jungles of Vietnam. It didn't just wound its victims, it crushed them. The mechanics were simple but terrifying. Suspended from a tree branch, a heavy 24-inch ball made of wood, clay, or metal waited in silence. Its surface was covered in sharpened spikes, each one designed to rip through flesh and bone. The ball was held back with tension, ready to swing forward with devastating force. A tripwire, nearly invisible against the jungle floor, was all it took to unleash destruction. The moment a soldier stepped on the wire, it was already too late. With nothing to slow it down, the ball came hurtling through the air at full speed, crashing into anything in its path. Weighing upwards of 40 pounds, it struck with the force of a sledgehammer. The spikes ensured that it did more than just knock a man off his feet. It pierced deep into his chest, stomach, or skull, sometimes killing instantly. Can you imagine that kind of impact? 1 second you're walking cautiously, scanning the ground for danger. The next, a massive spiked mace comes swinging out of the trees like something out of a medieval battlefield. And it wasn't just the direct hit that made it so lethal. If a soldier was lucky enough to survive the initial strike, his body was left shattered, bleeding, and barely able to move. The jungle was not kind to the wounded. The heat, humidity, and bacteria in the air meant that even a small wound could become a death sentence. A soldier knocked to the ground by a swinging mace wasn't just injured, he was vulnerable. The Viet Cong knew that a wounded man slowed down his unit. He needed to be carried, protected, and treated. Every extra second spent rescuing him was another second for the enemy to strike. This trap was a perfect killing machine. It didn't need gunpowder, electricity, or advanced engineering. It used gravity, physics, and the natural surroundings to do the job. And worst of all, it could be anywhere. In the thick jungle, every tree held the potential for death. American soldiers had to endure countless dangers in the jungles of Vietnam, but some threats were as silent as they were deadly. Among the cruelest and simplest traps used by the Viet Cong was the bow trap, a weapon of pure patience waiting in the shadows for its next victim. This deadly setup was nothing more than a bow, drawn back and held in place by tension, aimed directly at the path of an unsuspecting soldier. It was rigged to a tripwire stretched low across the jungle floor, almost invisible beneath the fallen leaves and thick vegetation. A single misstep, a careless boot brushing against the wire, was all it took to release the arrow at full force. The arrow strikes hard and fast, driving deep into the chest or stomach, piercing through muscle and organs like a hot knife through butter. The soldier barely had time to react. 1 second he's advancing, the next he's gasping for breath, clutching at the shaft buried deep in his body. Some soldiers survived, but many bled out within minutes, alone in the thick jungle. And the cruelty of this trap did not stop there. In some cases the bow was hidden in a small pit, angled upward instead of straight ahead. Instead of striking the chest, the arrow tore through the groin, the legs, or the stomach from below. The injuries were just as devastating, and moving the victim often made the damage worse. Like so many Viet Cong booby traps, the bow trap didn't just kill, it hunted. It waited, sometimes for days, silent and unseen, triggered only when the enemy walked into its grasp. It needed no gunpowder, no bullets, just the tension of a drawn string, the patience of an unseen enemy, and the certainty that eventually someone would walk straight into its deadly path. If the tiger trap and swinging mace shocked you, wait until you hear about the Viet Cong's most terrifying booby trap, snake pits. Unlike sharpened spikes or hidden explosives, this trap used living, breathing weapons to strike fear into the heart of American soldiers. The enemy didn't need to build a complex mechanism or spend time digging elaborate pits. All they needed was a venomous snake, a bamboo tube, and the patience to wait for their victims. The snake pit trap was most commonly found deep within the underground tunnel networks used by the Viet Cong. The tunnels were already a nightmare for American tunnel rats. The soldiers sent in to navigate the pitch-black, narrow, airless spaces where the enemy could be hiding around any corner. But what if the enemy wasn't a person at all? The trap worked in a disturbingly simple way. A poisonous snake, usually a bamboo pit viper or a Malayan crate, was stuffed inside a bamboo tube and suspended in the tunnel. A tripwire or sometimes just a slight touch would release the snake, sending it lunging directly at the unlucky soldier's face. In the tight, claustrophobic darkness of a tunnel, there was no room to dodge. The bite was almost guaranteed. And the consequences? Pure agony. The bamboo pit viper's venom could turn flesh necrotic within minutes, meaning that wherever the fangs struck, the skin around the wound would begin rotting away while the soldier was still alive. But the real terror came from the Malayan crate, also known as the two-step snake, sometimes exaggerated as the three-step snake. According to legend, a soldier bitten by this deadly creature would only make it 2 steps before collapsing and dying. The reality? The crate's venom attacked the nervous system, shutting down breathing and muscle control within hours. Without immediate medical attention, death was inevitable. But snake pits weren't just found underground. The Viet Cong would also hide snakes in abandoned supply packs or old weapons caches, and even tie them to tree branches at head height, waiting for an American soldier to reach for cover or lean against the wrong log. We can't talk about the deadliest booby traps without mentioning the infamous cartridge trap, also known by a chilling nickname, the toe popper. Unlike large explosive mines, this trap was small, nearly invisible, and designed to cripple its victims in an instant. The mechanics of the cartridge trap were disturbingly simple. A single round of ammunition was placed inside a short bamboo tube, positioned over a nail embedded in a wooden board. The tube was then hidden inside a shallow hole and camouflaged to blend perfectly with the jungle floor. To the naked eye, there was nothing there, just dirt, leaves, and twigs. But underneath, death was waiting. The moment a soldier stepped on the trap, his weight forced the bullet onto the nail, turning the nail into a firing pin. The bullet discharged straight upward, tearing through his boot and into his foot. The pain was immediate and excruciating. Smaller caliber rounds would shatter bones and destroy muscle tissue, leaving the victim permanently disabled. Larger shells, however, were lethal. A soldier unlucky enough to step on a cartridge trap, rigged with a shotgun shell or something more powerful, could lose an entire leg or bleed out in minutes. But the worst part? The soldier was never the only victim. Just like punji sticks, the real goal of the trap wasn't just to wound. It was to slow down the entire unit. A screaming, wounded soldier meant his team had to stop. Medics had to rush in. Comrades had to carry him out. And while this was happening, the Viet Cong had the perfect opportunity to strike. Many of these traps were placed in areas primed for ambushes, turning an already brutal injury into a tactical nightmare. Cartridge traps were nearly impossible to detect, hidden beneath layers of dirt, leaves and debris. There was no warning, no way to tell where the next step might trigger another explosion. For American soldiers in Vietnam, the jungle wasn't just dangerous, it was booby-trapped at every turn. But wait, there is even more. As the name itself says, the grenade in a can trap was exactly that, an explosive hidden inside a simple can, waiting for an unlucky soldier to set it off. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This was one of the most devastating booby traps that the Viet Cong used, designed to kill instantly and spread terror through the ranks of American troops. The mechanics of the trap were horrifyingly simple. A grenade with its safety pin removed was placed inside a can, keeping the striker level, the part that actually ignites the grenade, tightly pressed down. A tripwire was attached, stretched across a jungle path, a tunnel entrance, or even hidden beneath the water in a shallow stream. The moment a soldier tripped the wire, the grenade was yanked out of the can. The soldier who triggered it had no chance. In the thick, suffocating jungle, filled with mud, vines, and tangled roots, there was nowhere to run. If the grenade was close, it could rip apart a man's torso, tear off limbs, or send lethal shrapnel through his entire unit. Even if the victim wasn't killed immediately, the severe wounds meant he wouldn't survive long without urgent medical help. One version of this trap used a single can secured to a stake in the ground. An even deadlier version involved 2 grenades placed inside cans on opposite sides of a narrow path. The tripwire stretched between them, ensuring that whoever walked through the area wouldn't trigger just 1 grenade, but 2, one on each side, blasting them from both directions. But the real horror of the grenade in a can trap was its unpredictability. It could be anywhere, on the ground, in trees, or even inside Viet Cong tunnel systems. American soldiers had to be constantly on guard, knowing that any step, any brush against an unseen wire, could be their last. You realize by now that the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army turned everything into a weapon. They didn't just attack with bullets and ambushes, they used the instincts and emotions of American soldiers against them. One of the most cunning and brutal traps they employed was the flag bomb, a deadly trick disguised as a symbol of victory. American troops took great pride in capturing enemy flags. It was a sign of dominance, proof that a Viet Cong stronghold had been taken. Soldiers would race to tear down the red and yellow banners left behind after a battle. But what they didn't know was that the enemy was counting on this. The Viet Cong knew that US troops would go for the flag, so they rigged it with explosives. The trap worked in different ways. Sometimes an explosive was wired to the flagpole itself. Any attempt to move it or pull it down would trigger a deadly detonation. Other times the flag was connected to a hidden pressure plate or tripwire. The moment a soldier yanked the flag free, the charge would explode instantly, sending shrapnel flying in every direction. Imagine the moment. You and your team storm an enemy base, adrenaline rushing through your veins. The Viet Cong have retreated, the area seems secure, and then you see the enemy's flag still standing as a trophy waiting to be taken. But the second you grab it, everything changes. A sudden blast rips through the air. The soldier who touched the flag is gone in an instant, torn apart by the very symbol of the enemy's defeat. His comrades are thrown back, ears ringing, bodies shredded by the explosion. Victory turns to horror. This wasn't just a trap, it was psychological warfare. It made the American soldiers question everything they picked up, everything they touched. Viet Cong fighters took it even further, rigging personal items, weapons, helmets, and anything US troops might take as a war trophy. This variation of the trap was known as keepsake lose hand, because those who tried to take souvenirs often lost a hand or their life. It is now clear to you that the jungles of Vietnam were more than just a battlefield. They were a deadly maze of hidden traps, unseen dangers, and psychological warfare. Every step, every touch, every moment of carelessness could mean the difference between life and death. But which of these traps do you think was the most terrifying? Do you think modern warfare has evolved beyond these brutal methods? Or do these kind of traps still exist in different forms today? Share your thoughts below, and let's continue to uncover the dark realities of war, because understanding the past is the only way to prepare for the future.